You're watching Headlines. I'm Anastasia, Lavrina. President Donald Trump is taking bold steps to reshape the way the U.S. government handles its finances, particularly in its role on the global stage. This week, the president signed an executive order that marks the beginning of an ambitious plan to establish a sovereign wealth fund. The fund is designed to generate substantial revenue for the government, tapping into new avenues for financial growth and influence. With this move, Donald Trump is signaling a shift in how the U.S. approaches international investments, aiming to reshape America's financial footprint abroad while potentially leveraging these assets for diplomatic leverage. In a dramatic shift in U.S. foreign policy, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced on Monday that he will assume the role of acting administrator for the U.S. Agency for International Development. This move effectively marks a de facto takeover of the humanitarian agency by the State Department, a step that could redefine how the U.S. delivers foreign aid. More on this issue now in my program. Joining me is Gustavo Aristegui, former ambassador and member of Parliament. Warm welcome to our program.
Thank you very much, Anastasia.
Thank you very much. So, how will the creation of the U.S. Sovereign Wealth Fund impact the global financial landscape?
I think that there's been much ado about nothing concerning the creation of a United States Sovereign Wealth Fund. If you see, that is something that is a usual behavior or pattern of modus operandi of many governments around the world, even governments that are very developed democracies, like is the case of the Kingdom of Norway. Norway has the richest sovereign fund in the world that is impeccably managed and that has contributed in a phenomenal way to the development of the country. If you see today's Oslo, and you compare it to the Oslo of 20 years ago, it has nothing to do, and all of it is thanks to the investments made by the Sovereign Fund. The Sovereign Fund also buys and makes investments in different parts of the world, and it gives the country leverage also in foreign policy. That is the same case of the PIF in Saudi Arabia, QIA in Qatar, or the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority in the Emirates, and many, many others. I'd like to stop briefly to analyze the strengths and the characteristics of the Chinese Sovereign Wealth Fund. You know that the Chinese have two instruments of investment. One is the investment or the body that purchases foreign sovereign debt. That gives the Chinese government a huge leverage over the countries. The biggest creditor of sovereign debt of the United States of America is China, through one of its sovereign investment arms. The other one is a sovereign investment fund, like we know it, that invests in different countries. As you know, the problem is that in some very sensitive areas, such as defense, critical raw materials, rare earth, or any other strategic investment, it is highly suspicious when very powerful countries use their sovereign investment funds to try to penetrate in these areas. And there are some very strict rules. For example, in NATO, the NATO countries are banned from allowing Russian investment or Chinese investment, or definitely Iranian investment, or any other rogue state as Iran is, to invest in very sensitive areas, like I said, defense, energy, or anything that has to do with strategy.
Mr. Aristegui, the Trump administration didn't share many details on how the fund will be set up or where the money for it will come from, although the U.S. economy is one of the largest and most diverse in the world. It's also running a deficit. So what potential risks and rewards does this strategy present for the U.S. economy and its international influence?
Let's start with the beginning of your question. The United States is a country that has a very strict legislation on how to procure funds for government. Anything that has to do with public funding has to necessarily go through Congress. and specifically the House of Representatives. To the extent that, as you know, any public servant, any civil servant that has a certain level, that is assistant secretary upwards, including, of course, secretaries and the administrators of federal agencies that are very powerful and that manage billions of dollars of federal funds, need congressional approval, that is Senate approval for their appointments, and they need the approval of the House of Representatives for their funding. So that's the Appropriations Committee that is the most powerful in the United States Congress. So I assume that most probably the part that will be that will come from public funds will necessarily have to go through the approval procedure of the United States Congress. And if there is by any other chance the participation, be it of the Federal Reserve, remains to be seen. I don't think that the Federal Reserve has the powers, the legal powers, to be able to participate in the sovereign wealth fund. Probably, if there is a legal reform amendments, it could, but there could be some very important contributions by the largest corporations in the world, like the technological giants of Silicon Valley. That's one thing. You were asking about the repercussions for the American economy and for the world economy. I don't think that this is going to be disruptive. It is only logical that such a large economy wants to focus its investment efforts in such a way that it will try to benefit the long-term interests of the United States of America. I don't think that this is against anybody. I think that of all the measures that have been announced by the Trump administration, probably this one is the most neutral of all.
So we can clearly state that this fund may pave the way for a new era of public-private partnership in the United States, right?
Doubtlessly. You very well put it. I don't think that the funding of this sovereign fund can come in any other way. It has to necessarily be a public-private partnership. Otherwise, it is impossible. It is impossible because to be able to make an impact and to have influence in the world, we're talking about huge sums of money that can only be allocated by the federal government through the procedures that are established in the Constitution and in the law, and by the private sector following their internal rules, of course.
But will this lead to more alignment between foreign policy and humanitarian assistance, or might it blur the lines between diplomacy and aid?
No, I think that there's going to be a very clear-cut difference. Let's see. You have also in your introduction mentioned the fact that Secretary of State Marco Rubio has assumed the executive direction of USAID. Let's see. One thing is the investment to try to align the investments of the future sovereign fund with the long-term interests of the United States, and a different thing is aid for development. Unfortunately, and not only in the United States, but in many Western countries, there is a disalignment. There is a complete divorce between the goals and the strategies, the roadmap of governments in foreign policy or in internal policy, the priorities of any government, and the priorities and roadmap of the development agencies. Development agencies are one of the arms of foreign policy. If those development agencies are not aligned with the foreign policy of the government that funds them, there is a serious problem that needs to be corrected. I have been witness of this in the past when the Spanish Development Agency that is under the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs acted, the office of the aid coordinator in different embassies in developing countries acted in a completely independent, if not autonomous, completely independent manner from the embassy and the ambassador, doing exactly what they wanted and not necessarily aligned with the interests of the country or the directives of the government in place, which is completely unacceptable by any standards. And I understand perfectly that the United States wants to correct this also.
Well, US aid now, Donald Trump and Elon Musk are opening the secrets of the work of that structure, of that organization within the decades. It's corruption, it's inappropriate using of the American money, it's investments. And we do know about the destructive role of this institution in some parts of the world. Then what's your opinion? How it was possible for the administration to keep in a secret of so much about that organization? And should we expect that the new president, which will come in the White House in 4 years, probably may decide to change the structure back?
I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's exactly that. You cannot demand transparency and accountability from all agencies of the federal government and not do it to others just because they are ideologically more aligned to those that are demanding transparency to the executive branch of government. The development agencies of any democracy in the world have to be subject to the rule of law, have to be subject to the rules of transparency and accountability, and have to be responsible of what they spend it on. There has been a scandal that has come up because several members of Congress have shown the list of some of the projects that were being funded in different parts of the world, and it is completely absurd when there's so many people that have serious health problems, serious tragedies happening all around the world, natural disasters that need to be taken care of, or pandemics, outbreaks of viruses or infectious diseases, or even famine. And I think that investing hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars for woke ideology, comic books, or courses is completely immoral by any standards.
Well, and one more question. The idea of pushing first and then de-escalate may seem illogical in traditional diplomacy. What are the underlying strategic goals behind this approach of Donald Trump? And do you think it will work in the regions like the Middle East or East Asia, for example?
Well, I assume that you're also speaking about the temporarily averted commercial war that at the brink of midnight last night, with a conversation between Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump, there was an extension given to the tariffs that were going to be imposed on Canadian goods. You see, I do think that in politics, the goals and the principles need to be accompanied uh, by the manners and the politeness and the let's call it the rules of human behavior that make human interactions possible. I quite frankly miss very much the style and the courtesy that was present in everything that President Ronald Reagan did during his mandate. He was harsh on the bottom line, on everything that pertained the defense of the interests of his nation, but he never lost his temper, never lost his cool, and always was a polite, courteous gentleman. This is very important in politics. Second,
Right.
I think that protectionism is suicidal. The last time that blanket tariffs were imposed on all trading partners of the United States of America was in 1930, the Coutts-Hallward law. That was one of the main fueling factors of the Great Depression. And this could happen again. And if we're obsessed with creating a commercial surplus and trying to balance the balance of payments in such a way that the trading deficit of the United States is going to be corrected, let us not forget that the largest trade surplus of the history of the United States was during the Great Depression. That means that protectionism necessarily leads to poverty, less employment, less growth, stagnation, and actually endangers the power of democracies and the extent of democracy and freedom throughout the world. Free trade is an essential part of freedom. Without free trade, there is no extension of democracy around the world. Finally, when you were saying that the new diplomacy, if it's effective or not, I think that you can be very clear, not necessarily harsh, in making your point as to which interest or all the interests of your nation that need to be defended. This is obvious. And if even some of your main trading partners, as is the case of Canada or Mexico with the United States that are members of NAFTA, have not been taking care of their borders, need to have the incentive of some kind of, let's call it, retortion measure, well, that be it. It is legitimate. It is in the international law, and it is in the international customs. Let us not forget that if President Sheinbaum accepted to send 10,000 members of the National Guard to the border with the United States, it's because she could have done more before, as she is doing more now. It's exactly the same case with Prime Minister Trudeau. And all of this nationalism, it's working both ways. The United States of America says America first, but some Canadian supermarkets were pulling down American goods from their shelves. This is not the way to react.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I'm sure we will come back to this issue very soon. Thank you so much for joining our discussion today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Just to remind, today with us was Gustavo de Aristegui, former ambassador and former member of parliament. Dear viewers, do stay with A News. You watched Headlines. My name is Anastasia Lavrina, and see you in the next edition.